Well, hello there. Thank you for joining me today. Got a good show for you. Well, good in the sense that maybe kind of a warning show for you. I started out looking into vitamin D, and it kind of morphed into also going into the multivitamin business in general. So if I were you, I'd be paying attention because this D3 business is just wild as can be because it's actually a hormone. And these people are just all on social media. Yeah, take 50,000 units. Yeah, 100,000. Yeah, I cured everything with all this vitamin D. Well, I'm not sure that's such a great plan. But anyways, before I get started, and if you're thinking, well, why worry about this? Robert Kennedy Jr. is going to help the health industry. Well, looky here. Guess who got one of the first key Trump administrative positions? Well, a seed oil lobbyist. Yes, you heard me right. The people from the seed oil lobby are in the Trump administration. RFK Jr. is a liar. Watch him lie. Watch him lie. Anyway, so before I get started, interesting thing happened a couple of weeks ago. Actually, notices went out from a fusion center. So listen up, okay? It was following the shooting. The New York State Intelligence Center, that's what they're calling it, identified a large amount of negative sentiment toward healthcare executives and health insurance companies on social media. And it was in a bulletin produced by a regional intelligence group on December the 12th, also known as fusion centers. The bulletin goes on to warn of users online wanting to counter corporate greed, as well as growing negative sentiment around conglomerates, the wealthy, and executive staff at private and public organizations. Setting aside the yeah, no shit factor, the report provides rare insight into how the government threat machine stokes fear among law enforcement agencies across the country. So, this is how these fusion centers are working. I've done several shows about these things. Listen up. I am a terrorist according to the government. I'll have a little bit more about the new terrorist stuff down here. But there was also something I ran across in my wanderings. We talked a lot about that. Let me scroll down here a little bit. That guy, Sabate, the Sabate guy. And actually, he wasn't the first one. There was a guy before him because remember the Sabate guy, the guy who flipped the switch from making sin part of enlightenment or something. Anyways, that guy, there was a guy before him. And because Sabate guy, they were like, well, we don't really know if he's Ashkenazi because it looks like he may have came from Spain, but then he ended up in Turkey, right? Well, the guy before him, they're more clear about where he came from. The guy before him is actually named Isaac Ashkenazi Luria, also as Deluria. His father was a member of the Ashkenazi family of Luria from Germany or Poland, emigrated to Jerusalem, and apparently there married into the Sephardi Francis family. As he died while Isaac was a child, his widow took the boy to Egypt, where he was brought up in the home of his brother Mordecai Francis, a wealthy tax farmer. Traditions concerning Luria's youth, his stay in Egypt, and his introduction to Kabbalah are shrouded in legend, and the true facts are difficult to distinguish. Contradicting the widely accepted belief that he went to Egypt at the age of 7 is his own testimony recalling a Kabbalistic tradition, which he learned in Jerusalem from a Polish Kabbalist. So yeah, this guy is new, and I'll have more about him later, but he was the one prior to the Sabate guy? Because everybody's talking about the Sabate guy as the only one, right? Well, I went and looked a little bit further, and no, he wasn't the only one. This is why you need to be careful just repeating things, because see, I repeated it because I thought, well, he is the only one, right? Well, turns out he wasn't. So anyway, so I had this conglomeration of shows going on today with all of this stuff about vitamin D because I sort of had intermixed some cancer stuff, and then I have new information about the wind and show things like that, the wind, hurricanes, and all that. And also, I want to share with you my files about the Tunguska event that involved Tesla. There was this event that happened early 1900s where a big hole got blown in the earth, and that may be where this stuff about direct energy weapons is coming from, but it all got too complicated to talk about for today. So, anyhow, also this week you notice Elon Musk did that. They call it the controversial hand gesture. Well, everybody's calling it a Nazi salute, but keep in mind, it is a Bellamy salute. Talked about that recently. It is not the Nazis got that salute from the Americans because I believe that all of these people originated from Germany. I mean, look at the word Ashkenazi. It has Nazi right there in the name, right? I traced these people in the last few years all around through that whole area of Germany when they came out of Spain and all of that. Germany is where they all landed, and Germany is where this stuff all came from because 1901 Germany was just becoming a country. So yeah, this is where the inception of this stuff all started. Now, exactly was it hundreds of years ago or maybe even 150 years ago? At the rate that these people are blowing off the tops of their own heads and all the chaos they're creating themselves, I find it very hard to believe that these same people have been running things for like thousands of years. The takeover happened probably around the Gilded Ages. I keep going back to that time. So, and that's why they're doing all these crazy Nazi things because they are, in fact, Nazis. I mean, and the numbers also tie them together with the Nazis because the Ashkenazi Jews have all those genetic issues. It just so happens to be 300 of them, right? That number 300 comes up again. So that same core group of Ashkenazis who claimed they were from Jerusalem really weren't from Jerusalem. They got busted by those DNA kits. So of course they're saluting, flashing the Nazi salute because they are proud of who they are. And we are just being run by Nazi Jew gypsies, right? Anyways, because Elon Musk is the largest recipient of tax dollars in this country. He has also been put in charge of government spending and the largest donor. I rest my case. This is a mafia operation because it's all about they want to declare everybody a terrorist because that is psychopath trick number one. Get the jump on everybody else by claiming that you are what they are, right? And what that does is that usually incites us. Like if somebody says to me, well, you're a terrorist, I would say, of course I'm not a fucking terrorist. Get out of here with that stuff. Prove it if that's what you're going to say. We don't take things lying down, right? So, but what they do is that way, then when I get upset about them claiming I'm a terrorist, then they can say, look, hey, it proves itself. Look, did you notice the way she reacted to all this? Only a real terrorist would have gone crazy the way she did just at the mention of being called a terrorist. So that is the classic number one trick that they play is get the jump on everybody else. So yeah. So now they're bringing up the terrorist part again. Trump has indicated he wants to declare certain Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. So, yeah, are they terrorist organizations? Most of these drug traders are actually U.S. people running these things. So, what they do is they say, well, it's a big problem with all these drug cartels. So I'm gonna make a law that we're gonna crack down on these terrorists, right? Well, they're really not after the drug cartels because what would they do if they didn't have a good flow of drugs coming into this country? What they do is they identify the problem as being these Mexican cartels, and then they could clamp down the laws and they can say that was how it happened after 9/11. wakey wakey. They built laws after 9/11, and now they have all of these fusion centers, and little old ladies like me are being claimed to be a terrorist. It doesn't get much crazier than this, but it full stop is real, and that is what they're looking at. As a matter of fact, they're also looking at getting bounty hunters out there to turn in immigrants. So if you and there's going to put a fee on their head. So if you turn somebody in, you'll get some sort of fee, and so will the thugs who come to pick up that person. Yes, everybody needs to get their eyes open and awake and their ears open. And for God's sake, stop all the internal arguing amongst ourselves. All of this stuff about, see, you voted for him. Yeah, I told you not to vote for them. Look, they're sick from the vaccines. I told them not to have vaccines. Knock it all off. That is the position they want you to take. They want to drag you and your relationships into no talkie talkie, right? Now would be a time, if there ever was one, to start talkie talkie. Recognize trying to push everybody else around about what they should be doing was not our best effort. People should not have been trying to push other people around. Never before this did anybody get involved in what other kind of vaccines people were taking, and it just blew up over all that. It destroyed all these relationships. So just remember, it's all been a big setup, and it takes somebody who's not a coward to admit that they got caught up in the setup and to say, hey, I was really wrong about this. So anyways, because they're going to be coming after all of us, so the more solidarity you can show, the better for everybody else. So also another thing in the news which I found interesting, the Iranian supreme leader, Ayatollah. I love that hat he wears. That I would rock that hat too, because why have to comb your hair in the morning? Just put that hat on, a nice long robe. Anyway, so Khomeini has reportedly prohibited the development of nuclear weapons in a move some are perceiving as an attempt to initiate talks with the Trump administration about easing sanctions. Well, maybe one of these days I will eventually get to my file about Iran's nuclear things, and I'm hoping to, but they were never a threat to begin with. The threat is the United States. Logical thinking, folks. Why does the United States have all of these nuclear places? Iran has one, okay? We have close to 30 in this country. We have an insatiable desire to get more and more uranium. Where do you think that's all going for? Where do you think that's all going for? And now, because of AI, you know what they're talking about? AI is, well, don't even get me started, okay? It is such a scam, such a Silicon Valley scam that, but AI requires a great deal of energy, okay? We do not have the grid to handle the energy to begin with. This is why it's all a scam. So what they're doing now is they want to run around and reboot some nuclear places. Like in South Carolina, they want to reboot a giant nuclear project to meet the AI demand. Well, there is no AI demand. There is a demand for plutonium to pump into our homes. Let's keep the demand straight. So yeah, this AI is triggering all these investments, and it's also going to be triggering a lot of investments to supposedly fix the power grid. Hey, I'm not an engineer, okay, or an electrician, but I could every picture you look at, there's wobbly power lines running through every country. So the power grid was only meant to happen during this experiment phase. If they wanted to do this right for longevity, they would have put all of that wiring underground, full stop, end of discussion. This is a movie set, and we are the targets in the set, is really how it is, right? Because it's ban the Muslims. In order to keep those Muslims away, they're now officially using U.S. military planes for the very first time in history to deport those migrants. Migrants and factory workers are not showing up to work because they're losing about 80% of the workers just recently because they're worried about getting rounded up. So wisely, they're not showing up to work. Well, what is this going to mean? Well, this is going to mean Hello, higher prices. People don't understand that this thing to get rid of all those migrants, well, it's going to swoop up a lot of people. Remember Carlos and Maria down the corner who've had that Mexican restaurant for all these years that everybody loves so much. They're the targets too. So don't forget that. They ease in with one little wedge, and then before you know it, they're swooping everybody. So now they're actually, as a couple of days ago, they're using military planes to deport people. They're talking again. I started talking about this years ago. They're actually talking again about base U.S. military bases to house all these people. Well, you know, it seems to me the writing is on the wall, okay? If people are squawking over eggs right now, they'll really be squawking soon when bird flu hits, right? They are melting us down. That is the goal. That is the plan, not the bug in the system. As a matter of fact, I did have, it seems to me that I'm about the only person who has connected Silicon Valley with the mafia. And, the CIA was formed by merging of Hitler's SS and the American SS, OSS, right? So the CIA came from Hitler's SS and the American OSS. Notice all those letters sounded the same? So they merged Hitler's SS, American SS, OSS, and created the CIA. Why'd they do this? Well, they did it around the time to get in charge of things, right? So in my mind, there is an exact and direct connection between when Hitler's SS and the American OSS became the CIA. So don't forget that connection, okay? And I went to work in Silicon Valley in the late 70s when I got the job at Intel. I had been living in Southern California and I was relocated to Northern California. I didn't know anything about Silicon Valley, not a clue. I just had a friend in marketing who said, "Hey, there's a company in Northern California that's looking for somebody in marketing. Would you be interested?" I said, "Sure, why not?" Anyway, so yeah, I had no idea what Silicon Valley was because this was just the late 70s. Well, why do I keep saying because the crime? Well, John Gotti was the last big American mafioso guy and boss of the Gambino crime family in New York City. He ordered and helped to orchestrate the murder of Gambino boss Paul Castellano in December 1985 and took over the family shortly thereafter. Silicon Valley took off in the early 80s, okay? I'm here to tell you one more time it is a pump and dump complete run operation. So let's get to the subject of, well, I don't know. Am I there yet? I don't know. Let me see here. Yeah, I'm getting close. Okay, I was looking into other things in the home. People like, oh, opening your windows, such a radical idea. Well, there are people that never open their windows. They rely completely on the heat. And I don't think it's a radical idea if you live in the United States when your smart meters run your houses and plutonium is being pumped into your house. And another major factor is formaldehyde in our homes. Um, I saw this. I went to look for are there other things in our homes besides besides the overall issue with the smart meters and the uranium? Well, and obviously I don't have the time to become a home quality expert. So I just picked out the worst one, okay? And I was watching this ProPublica thing about formaldehyde because formaldehyde's kind of been on my brain for really long time because during the Gilded Age, they were actually using formaldehyde in our food. And that was when they finally came up with the FDA and stuff. That was the level that things were going was formaldehyde in our foods, right? So being good psychopaths, they figured out another way to put formaldehyde into our lives in a really kind of interesting way. So when I'm watching this formaldehyde clip about what's going on with homes and stuff, and it was about this stuff called foam insulation or UFFI. Anyway, so I was watching, you can spray foam into your house, and that would trap a lot, right? You got all this foam going in between your wall and the outside of your house. Plus, most homes here have that plastic siding. So, what do they do to put the insulation? Well, it uses formaldehyde. So, while I'm watching this thing, this little clip, and the ProPublica woman, somebody said, "Well, what can you do about it?" She goes, "Well, I suggest you open your windows." So, here's what there's a couple issues here with this formaldehyde. First is there's formaldehyde foam insulation, which the name itself should have shocked the people not into doing it right. It's because in the 1970s, urea formaldehyde foam insulation, or UFFI, was commonly installed in homes. It was temporarily banned in 1982 after its health effects became apparent. The ban was overturned when studies showed that off-gassing decreases over time. What they're talking about is this. They say, okay, well, this chest of drawers you bought from the store, this got delivered. It's going to what's called OFF gas, GAS, over time, meaning that all the toxic stuff in that formaldehyde will dissipate, right? Well, where is it dissipating to? Well, it's dissipating inside of your home. And this is where the catch is. This is the game with these psychopaths of omission, right? So it was banned in 82 after its health effects became apparent. The ban was overturned when studies showed that off-gassing decreased over time. Yeah, sure, it does over time, but how much over time? How long over time? Where does it off-gas to over time? And it went on to say, although UFFI is still used today, most modern spray foam insulator products do not contain formaldehyde. But you don't know because formaldehyde is a binder commonly used in engineered wood products. You know, like those desks you're sitting on, the little end tables you just picked up from Target or someplace. Yeah, that's where the formaldehyde is. So who knows? Who knows how the off-gassing is working in your house? I would suggest that got all these things that are off-gassing. You got the plutonium in the air. And what else? Oh, the vinyl siding on the sides of our houses and all of that. And houses with actual, there's houses that have the foam spray and houses that have the other kind of insulation. Well, they're all, in my opinion, they're all trapping this deadly stuff inside of our homes, which is, in fact, making us sicker. And actually, in a very evil way, it's quite brilliant because we're being taken down by all of these things while we sit inside of our homes with the windows closed, right? They love having us in our homes and not associated with other people because we're more isolated and we're more toxic. See how it's all working? So anyway, so let me get to what we're going on today. Um, and what they're doing now, for some reason, they seem to be releasing these studies about what some of the stuff is doing. Because they found that the ultra-processed junk food, colon cancer tumors, but this all really starts from their deal with pharmacy, right? Uh, because pharmacy, I believe that supplements are for people who are leery of the medical system and are getting trapped in another way. So, right off the top, full disclosure, that is how I feel about it, okay? But let me tell you how I got there, okay? According to the CDC, nearly 6 in 10 Americans regularly took dietary supplements in 2018. Last year alone, Americans spent nearly $50 billion on vitamins and supplements. However, the research team says there's no magic set of pills to keep you healthy. Instead, diet and exercise are still the key to good health. If you look around on social media, everybody is talking about they're selling you vitamins and stuff, right? Well, I did that show about vitamins in China. And just as a recap, the vitamins come from raw goods from either China or India, okay? And the problems are many. and you'll have to listen to that show, but the problems are many. So all of your prescriptions, all of your vitamins, and that's what years ago got me suspicious about the whole China thing, because I kept thinking, well, if they're really your enemy, would you really give them all your life-saving pills and stuff to manufacture? Well, of course not, because they're all in it together, right? So you get your manufacturing over there, so the way you can adulterate things is really great. It's just off the charts how adulterated these supplements are, and it gets hidden by a few things. It gets hidden by they claim that the ingredients are proprietary, so they don't have to tell you exactly how much of each thing. So it's really snake oil. So what they'll do is they'll tell you, they'll give you this list of ingredients that you'll recognize as really good. They just won't tell you how much is in each pill. So everything becomes a guessing game. So it's all about the money. So it appears to me now, maybe because I've been looking into it so much, that, I mean, social media is polluted with these people, right? They're all selling that green powder drink, and it is all 100% because of the money. And in doing the sugar, I have the sugar show that I'll be doing next, and like there's this girl who talks about, well, she says she's the glucose goddess or something like that. She says, no reason to fast. And she gives you all these little hacks to work around, like, oh, you should eat this biscuit because, anyway, it doesn't make any sense. But guess what? She's now selling a vitamin to level out your blood sugar. So it is all nothing but a big trick. Nothing but a big trick. Okay. And let me stop talking and tell you why. So, and then like in the comments, these people are totally bought into this, because there's this one big doctor called Dr. Berg. A lot of these big doctors and people with millions of followers, they're all out of Utah for some reason. Mormons out of Utah. But anyway, not my point. But anyways, this Dr. Berg, he's got millions of followers, right? And he says stuff like, well, as far as fasting, he goes, yeah, you can drink some coffee when you fast. It's like, really? Where's this guy coming from? So anyway, and he hands out all this advice, like, yeah, take thousands of them. Uh, so anyways, one of the comments, they're developing these people who are like blinded by these are strangers on the internet, right? And the comment was, I have had a homeopathic doctor flip out when I told them I take 10,000 to 20,000 IUs of vitamin D every day. They were legitimately freaking out, saying that was too high. I was like, nah, Dr. Berg's info on the topic, every doctor needs to learn. So yeah, that's kind of thinking out there, right? That, yeah, this guy's just getting a little bit too irrational, because here's why it's happening. Why it's happening is another comment under John Campbell. He's also pushing this vitamin D, also a very dangerous person with millions of followers. On one of his followers, they said this. They said, I use ivermectin now anytime I feel unwell, thanks to my doctor, who is also an angel like Dr. Campbell. So yeah, ivermectin. Yeah, go ahead and reconstruct your DNA, because this guy on the internet told you. But what they're all avoiding is, where did those vitamins come from? How are they being manufactured? I took supplements after I got off of all those pills they had me on, because my system was quite destroyed. And what I found was they were full of additives. And I went to a couple of health people, and I ended up getting a case of shingles so bad I had to be bedridden for a few months. Okay. I lost my eyesight on my left side. I have permanent nerve damage on my left side. So do I believe what these people are saying? No, I do not believe for a second what these people are saying. And I got myself into some pretty dangerous trouble by going to a health expert and getting these supplements, right? They put me on raw almonds, and anyway, it triggered the worst case of shingles. And to this day, I still have shingles. What I'm suggesting is, learn to be your own advocate. Do not listen to some of these people, sniff it out for yourself. Here's another comment. It says, I take 60,000 units a day along with K2, magnesium, and zinc. I strained my back a few weeks ago. I took an anti-inflammatory med to help, but it only reduced the pain briefly. It wasn't until I upped my vitamin D to over 150,000 units daily that I saw improvement. Happy to report I'm back to normal now. So, this guy, this Dr. Berg, is telling people all this dangerous information, right? Well, what are they leaving out? And according to studies, the people who are most likely to take vitamin supplements are the people who least likely need them. The affluent and health conscious are popping supplements faster than anyone. Vita means life in Latin, and vitamins are essential for life. The World Health Organization, or who are you going to call, calls them the, listen to this, magic wands. They're admitting it right here. If people can read, okay? The who are you going to call calls them magic wands because they're used by the body to synthesize enzymes. Listen to that word, synthesize enzymes, hormones, and other chemical necessities. Unable to create vitamins from scratch, the body must fetch them from outside sources, typically food. But do the pills we pop for health deliver the same benefits? Humans need 13 vitamins to survive. Vitamins, also called micronutrients, because they are required in minute quantities and can be grouped in two categories. There are those that dissolve in fat, which would be A, D, E, and K. And because they dissolve in fat, they can accumulate in the body when consumed in excess. Key point there, right? They can accumulate in the body when consumed in excess. And then there are those that are water soluble, C and B, which are easily excreted. As anyone who takes large quantities of vitamin C and vitamin B can testify. So then they go on to say, we can debate whether this analysis shows that vitamin E supplements are harmful, but she said there certainly wasn't any benefit shown. With the possible exception of vitamin D, there is no need to consume more than the recommended daily amount of vitamins. And also keep in mind, they are the ones who create this recommended daily vitamins, right? Moreover, there is increasing evidence that excessive intake of certain micronutrients, also known as those vitamins, is deleterious. They acknowledge that overdosing on certain vitamins can be dangerous. The most common one to look out for is performed active form vitamin A. It does not take too much to get too much. Try to avoid retinol, retinol palmate, and retinol acetate, which may increase the risk of hip fracture and certain birth defects when taken at levels exceeding 10,000 IUs. So you can actually have birth defects and break your hips by taking too much vitamin A. And this person who takes that said this stuff, they said, if I'm wrong, then I've wasted a few dollars. If I'm right, I've lowered my risk for some diseases I don't want to have. This is the thinking right there, okay? People are saying, well, I want to not get cancer and all this stuff, so I'm going to be taking these supplements. And nobody, imagine this. If one of these Dr. Bergs or somebody admitted where these vitamins came from and stuff, what would that do to their business? Then we had Lionel Pauly, the guy who he was awarded a Nobel Prize in chemistry. for his insights into how molecules are held together. As Nick Lane, a biochemist from University College in London, writes in his 2001 book called Oxygen, Pauling was a colossus of 20th century science whose work laid the foundation of modern chemistry. Okay, so he was a colossal of 20th century science whose work laid the foundation of modern chemistry. Well, what did he do? Well, then came the vitamin C days. In his 1970 best-selling book, How to Live Longer and Feel Better, Pauling argued that such supplementation could cure the common cold. He consumed 18,000 milligrams or 18 grams of this stuff every day, 50 times the recommended daily allowance. In the book's second edition, he added flu to the list of easy fixes. When HIV spread in the U.S. during the 1980s, Pauling claimed that vitamin C could cure that too. In 1992, his ideas were featured on the cover of Time magazine under the headline, The Real Power of Vitamins. They were touted as treatments for cardiovascular disease, cataracts, and even cancer. Even more provocative are glimmerings that vitamins can stave off the normal ravages of aging, the article claimed. Sales in multivitamins and other dietary supplements boomed, as did Pauling's fame. But his academic reputation went the other way. Over the years, vitamin C and many other dietary supplements have found little backing from scientific study. In fact, with every spoonful of supplement he added to his orange juice, Pauling was more likely harming more than helping his own body. His ideas have not just proven to be wrong, but ultimately dangerous. Pauling was basing his theories on the fact that vitamin C is an antioxidant, a breed of molecules that includes vitamin E, beta-carotene, and folic acid. Their benefits are thought to arise from the fact that they neutralize highly reactive molecules called free radicals. In 1954, Rebecca Gershom at the University of Rochester first identified these molecules as possible danger. And that idea was expanded upon. Physics at UC Berkeley in 1956, who argued that free radicals can lead to cellular deterioration, disease, and ultimate aging. Throughout the 20th century, scientists steadily built on his ideas, and they soon became widely accepted. A similar result was found in postmenopausal women in the U.S. After 10 years of taking folic acid, a variety of the B vitamin, every day, their risk of breast cancer actually increased by 20% relative to those women who didn't take the supplement. It gets worse. One study of more than 1,000 heavy smokers published in 1996 had to be terminated nearly 2 years early. After just 4 years of beta-carotene and vitamin A supplementation, there was a 28% increase in lung cancer and a 17% increase in those who died. These aren't trivial numbers. Compared to placebo, 20 more people were dying every year compared to placebo, more people were dying every year when taking these two supplements. Over the 4 years of the trial, that equates to 80 more deaths. As the authors wrote at the time, the present findings provide ample grounds to discourage use of supplemental beta-carotene and the combination of beta-carotene and vitamin A. But Linus Pauling was largely unaware of the fact that his own ideas could be fatal. In 1994, before the publication of many of the late large-scale clinical trials, he died of prostate cancer. Vitamin C certainly was the cure-all that he cantankerously claimed it was up until his last breath. But did it contribute to a heightened risk? But given the multiple studies that have linked excess antioxidants to cancer, it certainly is not out of the question. A study published in 2007 from the U.S. National Cancer Institute, for instance, found that men who took multivitamins were twice as likely to die from prostate cancer compared to those who didn't. Now, that is a pretty alarming statistic, right? And this came from our own health people, right? 2007, the U.S. National Cancer Institute found that men taking multivitamins were twice as likely to die from prostate cancer compared to those who didn't. In 2011, a similar study on 35,533 healthy men found that vitamin E and selenium supplementation increased prostate cancer by 17%. So, well, it's hard to tell. We got all these doctors on social media, and what the trick is with a lot of them are selling their own vitamins. And the vitamin industry has all been compromised. Let me explain how. There's two different groups. There's the pharmaceutical companies. These companies, licensed by government agencies, produce synthetic vitamins and other nutrients through chemical reactions. Then you have the other companies called the nutritional supplement manufacturers. These companies also regulated by government agencies, and this is where it gets confusing. They're only regulated by government agencies in terms of, well, is the facility clean? They're not regulated by, well, what's in those pills. So that becomes confusing to a lot of people. They produce dietary supplements, including vitamins, minerals, herbs, and other natural substances by sourcing raw materials and formulating them into finished products. And this is where the trick lies. So a lot of pharmaceutical companies are right now buying all of these supplement manufacturers also. So there's a big shift happening right now. But basically, the raw materials that they're talking about, they come from China and India. And when you import raw materials into this country, what happens is this. All you have to do is say that it's your proprietary mix, so nobody knows what is in those ingredients. Well, how do you get rid of the problem of having them come from China on your label? Well, on your label, if you compile part of those vitamins here in the United States, you can claim they have a U.S. statement on them. They'll have tricky wording. It will say like you'll see a flag at the bottom of the vitamin, and then it'll say USA of international sources. Well, international sources mean China. I went on a tear about vitamins years ago because I got so sick from vitamins that I was bedridden for a few months, got the shingles and everything else from vitamins. So these things really need to be taken seriously. So anyway, and also the chemicals that they're using in these vitamins. Now they're the ones who did these formulations, right? Well, garbage in, garbage out, right? So this is all their ideas of how much we should be taking. So, and I do have some solutions to all of this, so don't worry about that. But anyways, let me just keep plodding through this. So the chemicals are mainly produced from waste material, just like fluoride is made from uranium. Yeah, they use waste material a lot because they love us so much. As a matter of fact, I saw this one dentist, a holistic dentist, and he said this. He said, you'd be better off having your kids not brush their teeth than to use toothpaste. So I suggest take this stuff back into your own care. Stop. You can't have it both ways, right? But let me keep going here. Um, so they take the raw materials, the plutonium and all that stuff, mix it up, and from waste materials, and they're used to make vitamins and similar supplements are heavily controlled and only allowed to be manufactured by companies. So some of them can only come through certain companies because Big Pharma produces. So this I believe is true, that who is manufacturing all of these raw goods? Who is at the source in China and India? Well, it is Big Pharma that's making all of the raw goods that all these these helpful little vitamin places are using and selling, right? So it is being controlled by Big Pharma, right? So because Big Pharma produces all the chemical raw material, because their scientists were the ones who cooked up all this stuff, right? So it went on to say, yes, Big Pharma produces all the chemical raw materials that is used to make your beloved supplements. Supplement companies simply purchase these chemicals in bulk and mix them together and then put them in a tablet, pill, powder. And listen to that show that I did. I went into all of this stuff about why they do that. Let me tell you, I don't just get taken down and go, oh, it was too bad that I took those vitamins and got so sick. No, I talk to chemists at vitamin companies, and what you do is you never let them know you have something up your sleeve, right? Say something. I picked out a couple of the big vitamin companies that do their own packaged vitamins, and I don't think the chemists get many phone calls because they were really happy to talk to me. So I just phase kind of open questions like, kind of worried because, I read somewhere that China is manufacturing these things. So I'm quite concerned, before I buy more from your company, where are yours coming from? And they say things like, yeah, that's our number one question. Yeah, see, people are onto that. And that's why they trick the labeling, right? You'll never see China on that label. Although I did find some supplements at Walmart, they did actually put China on the label. But the majority of them will not say China on them. So they go on to say, and the only controls that are made is that of contamination, purity, and that is the chemical it is supposed to be. And who came up with that chemical? Yes, scientists working for the pharmaceutical industry. So we have vitamins in living cells. Vitamins are organic molecules. So then we have artificial vitamins. Health benefits. Evidence suggests that natural nutrients found in whole foods can prevent chronic diseases such as heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and premature death. In contrast, synthetic nutrients, which are in fact vitamins, may have different or even adverse effects, such as increasing the risk of premature death, cancer, or other health problems. And always keep this at the tippy top of your mind. This is about eugenics and destroying our DNA. Vitamins and other nutrients from whole foods have a complex matrix of interactions and synergies that may not be replicated in synthetic supplements. Another strategy the drug industry has been using to gain a monopoly over the supplement industry is by simply buying up supplement brands. Because people that run the health industry have been yelling about this. Don't let them buy up our health food brands. Don't let Big Pharma do this to us. Well, first of all, the lie number one is the raw ingredients are coming from Big Pharma, right? It says it right here. Lie number two is none of this stuff is being tested. So what exactly are these people protecting, right? But their bottom line. So they want to get a monopoly by buying up supplement brands. For example, Nestle Health Science, for example, has acquired Garden of Life, Vital Proteins, Pure Encapsulations, Douglas Laboratories, Persona Nutrition, Gnesta, Orthe, blah, 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 AOV, Clean Athlete, and Bountiful. Bountiful, in turn, owns brands like Solgar, Osteobiflex, Puritan's Pride, Ester C, and Sundown, all of which are now under Nestle's control. You know, Nestle's the people that have killed people all over the world. The Bountiful brands alone generated net sales of 1.87 billion in the 12 months ending March 31st. So what they're doing is this stuff is really shifting in the last few years. Um, Deaths associated with use of dietary supplements are extremely rare compared to the death toll from prescription drugs. Yet supplements are routinely singled out as being potentially dangerous. Yeah, this is the argument they use. They'll say, well, you know, come on, who's ever died of their vitamins? Well, I can tell you a lot of people are dying of their vitamins, right? So, um, anyhow, and before I get to this vitamin D part, why'd they start putting vitamin D in our food? Well, I think they called it a vitamin because it might have set off some alarms if they said, "Oh, we're going to put D hormones in your food," for example, right? So I think by using the word vitamin instead of D, because remember, this is all unregulated, right? So no one would get the wiser, right? And remember, the vitamin D is actually in everything. It's in not just in those vitamin D pills. They've got it in our dairy. They've got it here. They got it there. And they got it in children's vitamins. They got it prenatal vitamins. I mean, it's everywhere, right? So if you're taking vitamins, you're taking multiple doses and not really knowing. But what is interesting about all of this, and I'm talking about a lot of people on social media talking about D3. I only saw a couple of them. In the intro, they'll say D3 is the naturally occurring hormone, and then they can move on to the rest of the subject, right? They kind of blow past the hormone part, and that never gets revisited. But here's what's missing, and it's all in those raw ingredients. So, one of the most common forms of vitamin D is D3, otherwise known as chlorsulfuryl, and I have all this written down below. It's a rat poison. In fact, it was originally developed and registered as a rodenticide in 1984. It kills rats because it elevates the levels of calcium in the blood, leading to acute kidney failure and then death. So, yeah, so, uh, yeah, the rat thing. Uh, it's rat poisoning, and it's right there in the literature. And I have on this page here, let me tell you what I have over here. Okay, right at the top of the page, I put some news things about all this stuff going on about pain bounty hunters and all that, if you want to take a look at that. So, vitamin D3 is not technically a vitamin. It is not an essential dietary factor. Rather, it is a prohormone produced photochemically in the skin from 7-deoxide. And on the down below, I went ahead and just published this down below because it's kind of a lot to take in. The molecule structure of vitamin D is closely allied to that of classic steroid hormones. So in other words, that makes sense that people would be having pain and stuff, and they gunged up on vitamin D3 because it's actually a steroid. So D is closely allied to that of classical steroid hormones like estradiol, cortisol, and aldosterone, in that they have the same root and ring structure. So technically, vitamin D is a sesquicoid because one of the rings of its, whatever that word is, structure has a broken link. So a sesquicoid is a type of steroid with a broken ring. The word sesquicoid derives from the Latin verb secare, meaning to cut, and steroid. So sesquicoids are described as a subclass of steroids under the IUPAC nomenclature. Some sources instead describe them as compounds derived from steroids. So clearly, vitamin D is a steroid, right? I think we can all agree on that, right? So, anyhow, let me tell you what else I have down below here for you to take a look at. I have a ton of links. I have some links about this foam they're spraying at houses, this fusion centers business. Oh, get this. Jill Biden dressed up as a giant panda bear for Halloween this year. Do they have any limits to when they'll laugh about raping and abusing children? Any limits at all? Also, I found a really good show about crypto's biggest lies debunked from somebody I trust a lot. So, Trump loves crypto. Crypto equals crypto Jews equal fake Jews. Crypto is actually fake. So, all this push about crypto right now, I suggest you take a listen to that show. And I'll be talking about Virgil Cinderstricker. He is the guy. Him and Cleckley teamed up about this supplement business. Kind of funny, huh? The main psychopath researcher was in bed with the vitamin people. Gee, what a shock, huh? So anyway, and I have a really good clip. This woman, she's a doctor. She seems rather rational, but she had to, in testing her father, she couldn't get his vitamin D levels up, so she went the route of a tanning bed. I'm not saying that I think a tanning bed is a good idea or a bad idea, but she explains how she was trying to get his D levels up, which is important to know. Anyhow, so I have all the stuff down here about they got the Nobel Prize about the discovery of vitamins. If that's not enough to point the red flags in their direction, right? And then I have the articles about why vitamin D3 is really a rat poisoning, history of fat manipulation, how it all got started really was in the 70s. They said, take the fat out of the diet, it's killing you people. And what they put in? Well, they put in sugar. So I have just a ton of stuff down there about why they're irradiating the food. And on the positive side, every window in your house should have something growing in it. If you can't build little shelves in your windows, if you have a window that doesn't get full light, grow lights are incredibly cheap. Just wire a grow light above your plants in your windowsill to get grow on them. I would get busy now if I were you because taking away 70-80% of the people in California picking produce, oh, inflation, here we come. So anyway, so I just gave you a couple of ideas to take a look at as far as grow lights. Now, fair disclosure, I have never once suggested that you do something that I'm not bothering to do, and I will not be growing my own food only because I am limited. But if I could hobble around more than I am, I would 100%, 1,000% be growing what I was going to be needing. And also, just a friendly reminder, be very careful if you go out buying garden soil. There's no regulations. Where do you think all that garden soil ends up with? They haul off of these toxic sites, probably into your gardening store. But anyways, I'm going to go back over here and keep going. So anyway, where was I? Oh, yeah. So D3, cholesterol, yeah, rat poisoning. And I'm hoping you will go and read all those links yourself because I am so tired of social media. Everybody just enters the picture halfway. Oh, look, it's a Nazi salute. No, it's not a Nazi salute. So before you start calling it a Nazi salute, it was the Nazis in the United States that came up with that salute, not the Nazis in Germany. So anyway, so they say that at high doses, this hormone causes blood calcium to rise to toxic levels, kidney damage, bleeding, and heart problems. This mouse and rat poison is also toxic to pets and must be kept well out of their reach. So how'd this all get started? Well, a guy named Virgil Cinderstricker, he was a professor of medicine and an internationally recognized specialist in hematology and nutrition. In other words, he was one of them. He published articles with Cleckley. They were the first to describe an atypical form of pellagra, now known as niacin deficiency, which was endemic in southern states. In 1939 and 1941, they published on the use of nicotinic acid or niacin or vitamin B3 as a treatment for abnormal mental states and psychiatric disorders. The studies they use, that was Cleckley and Cinderstricker, have been erroneously used to justify the use of megavitamin therapy in psychiatric disorders such as schizophrenia. So where did Virgil Cinderstricker come from? Well, he was a member of a notable American family, which included authoress Pearl S. Buck and the eminent epidemiologist Edgar Cinderstricker. I can't pronounce his name. I really don't care. It's Snyderstricker or something like that. But anyways, I have his information on the page down below. For more than 30 years, Snyderstricker or whoever, his career focused on nutrition. He was a pioneer in the area of nutritional deficiency disease. While based at the Georgia State Medical School in Augusta, his activities and influence extended nationally and in Europe as a civilian and in the military. From 1940 to 1945, Schnitterstricker served on the Food and Nutrition Board of the NRC in developing nutritionally sound combat rations for the Army. In 1942, he was sent to England by the Nutritional Health Division of the Rockefeller Foundation, ding, 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 to work with the British Ministry of Health in the nutritional section to determine the adequacy of the war rations allotted to the British people. See how they get in these positions because there's some elite person, right? And then they become the expert. Then they're over telling the Brits what to do, right? In 1944, he was called to active duty as colonel in the U.S. Army. In 1944 to 45, he was medical director of the nutritional section of the U.S. Public Health Service. Detailed to the United States, well, he was an all-around guy, right? He was in charge of the medical and nutritional care of 60,000 prisoners released from German prison camps, primarily the camp at Belsen. He was stationed in London, proceeding to Brussels with the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expedition Forces. He was assigned to Holland, where he cared for the released prisoners and conducted nutritional studies of the Dutch civilians. He assisted in the nutritional assessment and care of malnourished people in the geographic area occupied by the Germans, where the population had suffered from severe famine. So, and I also went and looked up the word vitamin. The word vitamin did not come into existence until 1910. Funny how that works out, right? Gilded Age, vitamins, electricity. When a Polish biochemist by the name of Casimir Funk made the discovery that there were certain vital amines that were needed for the body and only supplied by certain foods, right? Certain foods, right? Not pills, but foods. Without these vital amines, people and animals would suffer from diseases of deficiency. By combining the terms vital and enemy, he created the term vitamin. And that was in 1910. Gee, I wonder what people were doing before this. Researchers then discovered various vitamins and presumed that lots of pharmaceutical drugs could be produced from oil. Because petrochemicals were a brand new discovery, it could all be patented and offered for maximum revenues. However, there was a fly in the ointment for Rockefeller's strategy to control the medical industry, and that was the herbal and natural medications. They were incredibly popular at that time in the USA. At the time, practically half of all medical professionals and medical colleges in the U.S. were practicing holistic medication using understanding from Europe and practices used by Native Americans. Rockefeller was a monopolist, so he knew he had to get rid of his most significant competition. To do this, he used the time-proven strategy of problem, reaction, solution. This concept works by developing an issue to terrify individuals, then offering a pre-planned solution, similar to terrorism, followed by the Patriot Act. A quote from John D. Rockefeller on the American workforce. To formulate his scheme, he sought help from veteran associate and fellow plutocrat Andrew Carnegie, who had made his money from monopolizing the steel industry. The prestigious Carnegie Foundation sent a guy called Abraham Flexner to make a trip around the nation. He was tasked with reporting on the status of medical facilities and medical colleges around the United States. This brought to life the Flexner Report, that's Flexner report, which led to modern medication as we understand it today. Naturally, the report declared the need for revamping and the centralization of medical institutions. Over half of all medical colleges were soon closed following the report. Homeopathy and natural medications were demonized and buffooned, with some medical professionals were imprisoned. Rockefeller then donated more than $100 million to colleges and medical facilities to help with the transition and change the minds of other researchers and doctors. He also founded a philanthropic front group called General Education Board, or GEB. And on the topic of cancer, the American Cancer Society was also established in 1913. By who? John D. Rockefeller. In 1910, the Rockefeller Foundation, along with the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching in New York City, helped to fund the Flexner Report of 1910, which was authored by a man named Abraham Flexner. Flexner was commissioned by the Council on Medical Education, which was created by the American Medical Association. The intentions of this report were to help evaluate and potentially restructure medical education in the United States, and that's exactly what it did. During this time, therapies such as homeopathy, herbal medicine, essential oils, chiropractic, and naturopathy were commonplace. The 1910 Flexner Report concluded that these natural healing modalities were unscientific quackery. This report also concluded that there were too many medical schools as well as too many doctors in America, and called for the standardization of medical education. Of course, this was the underlying intentions being that the American Medical Association would be the only entity that could approve medical school licenses in America. I'm pretty sure I have a copy of that report down below, but the Flexner Report is a book-length landmark report of medical education in the United States written by Abraham Flexner. Flexner not only described the state of medical education in North America, but he also gave detailed descriptions of the medical schools that were operating at the time. So that was how it all got started. And another interesting date to take a look at, right? Because, the Gilded Age, late 1800s, 1910, they're revamping the medical stuff. What was wrong with it all of a sudden then, right? Except a certain group of people took over. Okay, let's talk about vitamin D deficiency. And you can do these tests by the mail. You don't have to go to a doctor or anything. The first step is to determine if you have a vitamin D deficiency. This can be done with a blood test that measures your levels. The ideal range typically falls between 30 to 60 nanograms per milliliter. So that's about what you're looking for, right? Some signs of deficiency of D include fatigue, muscle weakness, bone pain, or frequent infections. So yeah, that was where people would probably think that if you're deficient in D and you're getting bone pain and stuff, and you think D fixed it. Well, it's because D is a steroid, right? So, and this is what I found the most amazing when I was looking around, because nobody started with the beginning, right? They all just picked up in the middle of that. Yeah, let's take all these vitamins, right? And I'm pretty sure I have it down. They are making a ton of money on these vitamins, but got to keep going on this part here. So chronic conditions, certain health issues such as osteoporosis, autoimmune disease like multiple sclerosis or rheumatoid arthritis, or some cancers may benefit from vitamin D supplementation. Well, there also are people saying that people are using it during COVID. Well, I think that I'm going to let you read this information because excessive vitamin D can lead to toxicity with symptoms such as nausea, vomiting, weakness, frequent urination, and kidney damage. So the tolerable, not you have to look at these. I'm not going to be giving you medical advice. You go and do what you feel comfortable with. Personally, I'm not comfortable with supplements, but I have a rocky past with them. So yeah. So what I found was all these people had another idea of what is going on, right? And I'll get back into this with the sugar thing. Because I'm going to clear up this wind thing and the other sugar thing in separate shows. So, what about? And people really had themselves whipped into believing that these artificial sweeteners okay. I see people like saying, "Oh, look, we got these chocolate chip protein bars. That's what I eat every morning before my workout." Well, I'd be kind of careful because artificial sweeteners do not increase blood sugar levels or insulin production like real sugars do. This causes the pancreas to respond differently to the artificial sugars because they give the pancreas nearly nothing to respond to. The consumption of artificial sweeteners can therefore lead to abnormal pancreas functioning and insulin levels, in addition to changes in other functions that affect our metabolism, which may put us at risk for related illnesses such as type 2 diabetes. So, and that all came about because of that. I have the article down below. There was a false Harvard study. A Harvard scientist named Mark Hegstein, a murderer who called himself a researcher, he was paid $6,500, which would be close to $50,000 in today's money, by the sugar industry to review the research on fat, sugar, and disease. So, and that was published in 1967, and that set off the entire stampede to take all of these, take the food, take the fat out of food, and put it with fruit. That was exactly how it got started. And also, what I found interesting is there was this journal did not require disclosure of conflicts of interest until 1984. Yeah, so their own journals. The Sugar Association paid highly esteemed Harvard scientists to publish a review that focused on saturated fat and cholesterol as the primary causes of heart disease at a time when studies were starting to accumulate indicating that sugar is a risk factor for heart disease. For example, during this period, much of the messaging on how to prevent heart disease revolved around choosing margarine over butter, which has lower saturated fat content. Now we know that margarine is high in trans fats, would contribute to heart disease, and have been mostly eliminated from the U.S. food supply. Not really true. It's still in the food supply. So, um, anyhow, so yeah, that's where they flipped the switch in the 70s. They paid off some scientists and they came up with this report. And funny, they didn't even have to expose their conflicts of interest. Uh, so then they said, let me see here. They advised Americans to have this low-fat, high carbohydrate diet, which Americans were advised to do for about 40 years. And this one guy said the low-fat diet remains deeply embedded in public consciousness and food policy. Well, yeah, of course it does, because the reason they took out the fat, not only just to kill us, was to it was made it more shelf stable. That was when they were really understanding how to make foods more shelf stable. So once they got that figured out, then they could export this poison all around the world. See, isn't everybody else lucky that they get their food from the U.S.? So, um, in Time magazine, which led the charge against saturated and cholesterol in support of the lipid theory of heart disease in the 1970s and 1980s, did an about face in 2014. It admitted they were wrong. Yeah, a little bit too late, right? So they were pushing that theory, and then they finally said in 2014, whoops. So they said the sudden change in press coverage over saturated fat seemed to have been brought about by consumer demand as big food manufacturers finally threw in the towel and admitted defeat in the war pitting margarine against butter, and butter won. Butter, but see, this is not true though, because a lot of people still use margarine, okay? So I'm trying not to use any of those animal products, but not my point. But that was when the whole flip, and it is still in people's mind. They're focused on the cholesterol and not the sugar. Time magazine actually ran a cover story that read, "Ending the War on Fat." Once politicians, the press, and the public had decided dietary fat policy, the science was left to catch up. And this is where we get this guy who came up with the K rations for the war. The war against fat was started by one man. Much of what we think we know about the supposed dangers of high fat intake comes from a single research project by a charismatic Minnesota pathologist named Ansel Keys, Keys. His 7-country study compared the health and diet of nearly 13,000 middle-aged men in the US, Japan, and Europe, and ostensibly found that populations that consumed large amounts of saturated fats in meat and dairy had high levels of heart disease, while those who eat more grains, fish, nuts, and vegetables did not. The influential Keys relentlessly advocated the theory that fat causes heart disease, persuading the American Heart Association in 1961 to issue the country's first ever guidelines targeting saturated fat, and he wasn't shy about shouting down any researcher who questioned his data. Yet it turns out there was a lot to question. Keys chose the countries most likely to confirm his hypothesis, while excluding nations like France, where the diet is rich in fat but heart disease is rare. That might have challenged it. When researchers went back and analyzed some of the data from the 7-country study, they found what best correlated with heart disease was no saturated fat intake but sugar. Even more damaging when publishing faulty dietary guidelines, something the USDA continues to do throughout the present now in 2015, was using the lipid theory of heart disease proposed by Keys to developing new cholesterol-lowering drugs called statins. Statins then became the best-selling class of drugs in the history of pharmaceuticals. And statins do a lot of things. Statins will make you get Alzheimer's. They found that statins are giving people type 2 diabetes. So in 2011, this person was criticizing the University of Minnesota research of Ansel Keys. In a very astute commentary, he clearly showed just why the mainstream media and Big Pharma were not so eager to criticize the junk science of Ansel Keys, and why even today this anti-saturated fat myth will continue to be official USDA dietary dogma. In fact, one could argue that Minnesota-based research has its fingerprints on the most damaging wrong turn ever taken in how we think about cardiovascular illness, a mistake that continues to cost our nation in sickness and in dollars, the one for which health authorities remain too embarrassed, confused, blinded by ideology, or loyalty to tribe to concede. We told the world that heart disease is caused by elevated cholesterol and that reducing saturated fat in the diet reduces this risk. That led the country to embrace the lowering of cholesterol with medications. All of those assumptions have proven themselves to be either overstated, oversimplified, or wrong, and that led us astray. Would it be too much for the leading cardiologists in our community to admit as much? It was nearly 60 years ago, as Dr. Daniel Gary extolled on these pages, that University of Minnesota scientist Dr. Ansel Keys, along with Dr. Francisco Grande and Joseph Anderson, defined the relationship between dietary fat and serum cholesterol, which linked cholesterol to heart disease. Gary went on to praise the creation of cholesterol-lowering drugs that stemmed from Key's work. Keyes constructed his hypotheses after studying the diets and heart disease in countries around the globe. But his research left out nations with data that did not match the hypotheses, and even within the data he published, populations existed in which diet and heart disease were wildly out of sync with his model. By 1970, an English researcher named John Judkin would argue that sugar in the diet was the cause of heart disease in wealthy nations. But Keyes, sensing that his theory was suddenly vulnerable to reconsideration, aggressively led the charge to have that research discredited. Today, the low-fat advice that ensued from Keyes' research is seen as having had a blowback. It caused the rise in our consumption of refined carbohydrates and added sugars, thereby causing metabolic syndrome characterized by a rise in triglycerides and lowering of HDL or good cholesterol. Statin drugs lower LDL or the bad cholesterol, and thanks to Keyes, the lowering of LDL has become the primary focus of preventative medicine in the United States. Don't expect Big Pharma and the USDA guideline to change anytime soon. They have much more to lose in the marketplace than just slumping sales of margarine due to consumer demand for butter. No, what at stake here is a multi-billion-dollar industry of lowering people's cholesterol levels through medication. So until Americans wake up and realize that statin drugs are one of the biggest scams in the history of healthcare, the cholesterol anti-saturated fat myth will persist. Butter is healthy, but if it only comes from the milk of healthy cows, and adding healthy saturated fats back into the diet is a positive step in the right direction. But until consumers start saying no to drugs, statin drugs, the nation's health will continue to suffer. So what they've done is they started doing these guidelines, and some of it's not that interesting, but in 1968, the Senate created a committee to look into hunger in America. Boy, haven't they just done a winning job, right? Over the following 9 years, committee members became convinced that a bigger problem was that Americans were eating too much and too poorly. In 1977, it published a set of dietary guidelines. You got to ask yourself, why are these senators publishing dietary guidelines, right? Suggesting that people reduce, because this is about eugenics. suggesting that people reduce their fat intake as well as increasing consumption of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and lean protein. The diet heart hypothesis remains a hypothesis, but as if already proven, it became enshrined in federal public health policy and was promoted by healthcare practitioners and the popular health media. The food industry at first pushed back against the government recommendations and succeeded in shifting some of the government guidelines. For example, getting reduced meat consumption changed to choose meats and fish that will reduce saturated fats. Soon, though, companies realized they could simply start marketing low-fat products, often adding more sugar to make up for the loss of flavor. So between 1950 and 1998, as low-fat diets took hold, deaths from heart disease fell by an amazing 53%. But as it turns out, this was a product of medical and surgical inventions. Incidence of heart disease actually remained steady. But by the early 2000s, many studies were undermining this low-fat ideology. Health experts began recommending good fats like olive oil and avocados and cautioning against too many carbs. Today, even the long-standing assumption that the saturated fat in whole milk is unhealthy is coming into question. So let's get into this. I'm not going to get into all this stuff. We have people. And I believe part of it is due to the pollution in our homes. I mean, there's people that live on CPAP machines to improve the oxygen levels in their bodies. You can improve the oxygen levels in your home by opening a window for about 10 minutes at a time, or step outside for 10 minutes to get a quick boost. Introduce houseplants like orchids and succulents. Get more oxygen immediately by inhaling through your nose for 2 seconds. So, yeah, I think that people needing machines to breathe at night, I mean, really, it could all boil down to the pollutants in the air, right? Because a lot of people are getting this chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD. It's a chronic lung disease that blocks the airway, making it difficult to breathe. But here's why I'm suspicious of it, and here's why. In the United States, more than 85% of COPD is caused by smoking cigarettes. Well, I don't believe that to be true for a second. 5 states where the COPD is the most prevalent within the United States. There are more than 24 million people who currently suffer with this disease. Kentucky, Alabama, Tennessee, West Virginia, Oklahoma. Well, what does it say about Kentucky? 9.3 of the surveyed population have COPD. Oklahoma, 8% have COPD. It could also be the homes we're living in, right? And they've had a lot of deals with those COPD machines. Geez, there was a huge recall of those Philips machines. They were actually killing people. What they had the machines designed so poorly, and this went on for years. They denied that anything was going on, but all the while people are dying because what was happening was it was the way I mean, you can look it up yourself. It's the way that the machines bring the air in through the plastic tube was getting contaminated. So you're breathing contaminated air. Where else does that sound familiar? Huh? Wearing masks, right? Wearing a mask, you're also breathing contaminated air. When you hook yourself up to a CPAP machine at night, the air that you are breathing is deadly. But only a good psychopath would give us a harm and then also try to sell us a cure, right? And the cure is really, 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 the cure is always more deadly, in my opinion, at least. So anyway, so yeah, if you know of anybody on one of those CPAP machines, those things are really, really bad. Now, I'm not going to give medical advice, but I would say that, try to sit up, breathe fresh air when you're sleeping and stuff. I'm sure that doctors never suggest that maybe you should get some fresh air, do they? Um, so anyway, so yeah, blame it on the smokers, right? Um, yeah, I don't think it was the smokers at all. So let me see here. I think that's about, I don't know where this stuff came from down here. Oh, this AG1, so I want to talk to you about. Um, they're all selling these vitamins, right? And AG1 is the one you see everybody selling. Gotta have this green stuff. All the big channels are selling it. AG1 ensures that their influencer partnerships are mutually beneficial. They make sure that this partnership is worth it for influencers by offering a generous commission structure. And I think that stuff costs you $99 a month, okay, for these so-called proprietary greens, which you would be much better off getting in a salad, but I'll get back to that later. But so essentially, when you're paying $99 to this person based on this influencer telling you this stuff is really going to turn your health around, well, they're getting paid $10 a bag. Do you realize that if you're moving, I mean, just think about it. These people have millions of followers. If they move even 500,000 of those things, that is just a ton and ton of money. Um, so how did they get us to? I'm gonna be taking a break here because I need to get to this part about how they started putting it into our farms and food and stuff. Basically, modern farm subsidies originated in the Great Depression as the U.S. government tried to protect the American people. Of course, they're always trying to protect us through social spending like the New Deal, of course, by FDR, right? The biggest criminal on the planet. This included the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933, and this is where it all got started, in which, in part, it paid farmers to destroy any surpluses. So that's where they came up with the paying the farmers to, they wanted to keep cheap milk very cheap. Now you have to ask yourself, what was their motivation to keep milk cheap? Well, I would have to argue it's because milk does not make a body strong or any of that kind of stuff. And here's another way they did it, and I'll read this. Let's see the milk thing. So the milk, they put the steroid being the vitamin D into the milk, right? And I'll read this piece here. It says, for those of you who are products of our country's wonderful public school system, try to remember the smell of cheap disinfectant used on checkered tile floor. Imagine the rows upon rows of fold-out tables assembled to fit as many kids as possible on their faux wood benches. Now picture the assembly line doling out prepackaged food product fresh out of the microwave onto your plastic tray. After selecting your colorful meat and starch products of the day, you come to the most important decision of the school lunch experience: chocolate, strawberry, or regular. The dairy industry in America has always been a big player in domestic agricultural products practices since World War I, when milk production was increased exponentially to provide the military overseas with a reliable source of nutrition. However, when the war ended and the market for dairy products died down, American farmers were left with an overwhelming surplus of what? You guessed it, milk. Though the government did what it could to buy and distribute it abroad as emergency aid and sell it to foreign countries, there was just too much excess to be worth the expenses. So they stopped buying it up. And of course, dairy producers were not happy with that. In order to keep dairy sales up, they struck a deal with Congress to create USDA sponsored PSAs promoting milk to the public. Cue the got milk propaganda. The industry's influence doesn't stop at creating TV spots and magazine ads. Another major element in this multi-million-dollar business is politics. When I mean politics, I'm talking about lobbying. Numerous members of Congress collectively receive more than $1 million from the dairy industry to keep their products ingrained in the federal nutritional guidelines each time a review comes around. Fast forward through the evolution of lactase persistence in European regions, yes, all early humans were lactose intolerant past their toddler stage. Domestication of dairy cows, the invention of cheese making, millions of people who died from milk-borne illnesses prior to the invention of pasteurization, a fourth of all food-borne illnesses in the U.S. were attributed to cow's milk prior to the early 1900s, and the invention of the glass milk bottle. And we find ourselves in 1922 with the seminal passing of the Casper-Olstead Act. This bill gave agricultural industries permission to act together, form organizations, and market their product. While the industry was very much reliant on small farms back in the day, this bill paved the way for the enormous dairy conglomerates with massive milk marketing campaigns of today. Without it, the American people would never have known the phrase "got milk." So, when the war ended, the milk production did not, creating a surplus and dangerously low milk prices. Throughout the 1930s, dairy farmers staged several strikes and unionized to demand a fair price for their milk. To appease these, I don't think it was to appease these farmers, but I'll keep reading here. To appease these farmers, the government created federal programs to artificially drive demand. The first of these programs included the 1940s federal milk program for schools and federally subsidized milk advertising under the Works Progress Administration. In 1946, President Truman passed the National School Lunch Act, which mandated each school lunch include between 1.5 to 2 pints of whole milk. In essence, since adults were not buying milk, the government solution was to force it onto their children. To this day, children who participate in the National School Lunch Program, which offers free or low-cost lunches to students of low-income families, are required to take a carton of dairy milk. Despite the government-funded campaigns to convince nearly every demographic of America to drink more milk, this surplus continued throughout the decades. In 1977, President Jimmy Carter, or JFK, allowed $2 billion to be funneled into the dairy industry over the course of 4 years. Gee, it's kind of funny. Why are they being so nice to the dairy industry? Oh, I got it, because vitamin D comes into the picture, right? As in the past, dairy farmers ramped up production to take advantage of this government subsidy, which resulted in yet a great surplus. Imagine how that happened. The soon-to-rot milk was homogenized into government cheese and held in underground storage units across 35 states. Yeah, I ate some of that cheese. They put together these boxes, and I knew somebody who was on welfare, and they had this cheese. Yeah, so anyway, so that's what they did with all that extra milk. So not only was this a waste, it was also expensive. In 1982, a New York Times reporter stated that the federal government would spend $40 to $50 million transporting the surplus dairy and another 40 to 50 million to store it. By this time, the government was spending $2 billion, and that was back in that day, right? $2 billion in taxpayer dollars annually to support the dairy subsidy. The solution was twofold: give the nearly moldy cheese to low-income citizens and funnel money into heavy dairy marketing. I'm going to take a break here, so I'll be back. Okay, where I left off. By this time, the government was spending $2 billion in tax dollars annually to support the dairy subsidy. The solution was twofold: give the nearly moldy cheese to low-income citizens and funnel money into heavily dairy marketing. Introducing the Dairy Checkoff Program, an industry-funded federal program which has a profound impact on what Americans choose to consume. Prompted by the dairy industry, Congress, of course, created the National Dairy Promotion and Research Board in 1983, whose sole purpose was to promote dairy products by way of marketing and nutritional education. To fund this effort, dairy farmers agreed to pay a small fee based on the weight of the milk they sold. This program is responsible for some of America's craveable and least healthy food products, including the Pizza Hut's stuffed crust pizza and Taco Bell's quesalupe and succeeding quesarito. The board has worked with dozens of companies to promote dairy-heavy menu items. The result is 40% more cheese on Domino's pizzas, more milky drinks at Starbucks, the larger cheese slices on Egg McMuffins. So, then they started adding the vitamin D, but let me tell you how careless this has been, okay? Most samples of milk from 5 eastern states contains either too much or too little vitamin D, researchers say. Most of the nation's 500 milk processing plants now add vitamin D to milk. And then I found this piece that just arbitrarily, in 2016, the FDA doubled the amount of vitamin D permitted in milk. So, and then in 2024, the U.S. military, like several countries, no longer pays for vitamin D testing unless someone is overtly deficient. They really like to get us away from that sun now, don't they? Don't even get me started on the toxicity of sunscreen. So if you're still using sunscreen, I'd suggest you stop. So I'm going to, let me see here. Which countries are the most vitamin D deficient? Now remember that they set up these tests, so I'm not saying that any of them are accurate, okay? Worldwide, many countries report very high prevalence of low vitamin D status. Less than India, Tunisia, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. For example, it has been estimated that 490 million individuals are vitamin D deficient just in India. Why do Arabs lack vitamin D? According to research published in the Journal of Nutrition and Metabolism, the Middle East and North African regions have a very high rate of vitamin D deficiency, which reaches 81% among various age groups. Reasons for this include cultural practices, climate, genetic disposition, and no, it's skin color. The darker your skin, the least likely you can absorb it, because people develop darker skin so they could be out in the sun, right? That's why Africa and places have darker skin. So, anyhow, so vitamin D is already extremely common, affecting approximately 42% of the U.S. population, according to the National Institute of Health database. So, yeah, vitamin D is kind of a big problem. Let me see. So they say that one quote that's important to know: I always encourage my clients to eat food high in vitamin D, like fatty fish, salmon, halibut, mackerel. egg yolks, mushrooms, and vitamin D fortified foods. See, this is how it goes off track already, right? So here's this expert saying, I already tell the people to eat this fat stuff, right? And then they say, I like to recommend vitamin D supplements because it can be difficult to get the right amount needed every single day from diet and sun exposure alone. Well, to me, when you start willy-nilly introducing supplements without thoroughly understanding if you can get it from the sun or the food, you're already entering a kind of a sketchy track, right? Uh, and also, listen to this, they're also now claiming, I found this report that they they say that babies, like infants, the ones that are breastfeeding, they say that there's not enough vitamin D in breast milk. So they've actually come up with some baby steroids in a dropper called vitamin D, and they think adding that to your breast milk in your kitchen is a good idea. Okay. So, yeah, considering that vitamin D is a hormone, now I don't know much about a lot of things, but it sounds to me like recklessly taking vitamin D is not a good idea. So, because what they started doing was, it all happened because of irradiating the milk. Um, they use irradiation to, like nuclear radiation, right? It's called irradiation. It's used to sterilize home products like Band-Aids, cotton balls, contact lens solution, baby pacifiers, and many packaging items. Sterilizing medical products such as surgical gowns, destroy bacteria in cosmetics. So they're already irradiating a lot of things that you're using, okay? And I would say that irradiating is, well, it wouldn't be my personal choice, let's put it that way, okay? So the part I'm getting to next here is they started irradiating the milk because of so-called contamination. See, what you can do is if you run a filthy place and you don't want to clean up or anything, you just start irradiating things, right? Just like you start adding formaldehyde to things that you don't want to deal with. So yeah, just put some formaldehyde. I read a comment, and I believe the person was being sincere, like in the last several months. And this person stated that they had worked as a manager at McDonald's and they were still using formaldehyde in the salads. And I didn't think he was telling a lie for a second because when they dip the lettuce in the formaldehyde, it stays green. This is all about greed and also destroying us at the same time. So it's really a twofold effect, right? They can keep the product on the shelf longer and they could cause us more harm because I'm not sure that irradiating anything is a good idea, especially when you get into things like baby pacifiers. It's so cosmetics, makeup, nonstick cookware coatings, purified wool, perform security checks on hand luggage at airports, and make tires more durable. Until recently, only bulk dried spices were radiated in the United States. But since January 1992, irradiated produce has been sold in some U.S. supermarkets. Starting in 1995, several thousand pounds of tropical fruits annually were irradiated and sold in Midwest and California markets. In July of 2000, a new facility in Hawaii permitted the transport of high-quality tropical fruits previously banned for insect quarantine purposes. So, yeah, what they're saying is irradiate extends the life, but what I would do if I were you, I would become very familiar with what I was putting into my body and start making consumer stands over things. Okay, they need your money, so stop putting up with it. And that's why I encourage you to read through the details I have below. I understand that, I took 3 shows and I'm putting them into 3 different ones. I got some sugar stuff in this one, should have had it in the last one and the next one. But here's the thing. Take charge of your own body. If you want to stay on the game board, it's the most important asset that you have. So it all starts with what you're putting in that mouth, I hate to tell you. And when people start saying, oh, I can't do that, oh, it's too hard. Well, we have been programmed to think that we can't do these things, right? And then we've also had a lot of marketing like, well, you enjoy a sweet treat today. Have a break today. Stop by McDonald's. Well, all of this has just driven people away from producing their own food. People used to actually have gardens, if you can believe this. I mean, they actually had gardens and stuff. It was a standard thing, right? Or they canned their food. If I were you, I'd be hot-footing it around when the the season happens because it may be the last season. I'd be hot-footing it around and figuring out who has excess crops that you can buy and start canning away. Um, but hey, just a suggestion. So anyway, so yeah, this irradiating stuff happened because they wanted to get more money, really. And they don't care what happens to our stuff. So let me keep reading here. In May of 2000, irradiated frozen ground meat was first sold in Minneapolis and quick spread to adjacent states. In early 2000, over 2,000 supermarkets in more than 16 states offer irradiated patties. So yeah, Colorado Beef offers frozen patties from supermarkets. So yeah, um, Schwann's, the food company, often offer irradiated ground beef. People think this is good stuff. Frozen irradiated chicken breasts have been available in the Florida area since the 1990s. Consumer reception has been positive, and the market share of frozen irradiated beef has increased. Well, irradiated just is a sloppy way of not cleaning up your food process, right? The availability of irradiated food has also increased as more consumers become aware of the high quality and enhanced safety of these products. Consumer demand and availability should increase. Well, here's where you got to start using your own heads, okay? This is where the consumer should say, hell no, right? So they say that although marketing is still on a small scale, sales of irradiated foods clearly demonstrates that consumers will select irradiated over non-irradiated foods when they perceive benefits, such as higher quality or longer lasting produce or safer meat and poultry. So the question then becomes, well, why were they passing all this rotten stuff off us in the first place that they even needed irradiated? I don't mean to get too logical here, but irradiated sterilization of meals prepared for hospital patients is an advantage to those whose immune systems have been suppressed by disease or therapy. Irradiated meat uh, and poultry are also used in some healthcare facilities where a high level of safety is required. See how they're making it like it's got to be required. I got to tell you, it's probably very dangerous. Okay, because they started it with the milk. I'm getting there in a minute. Irradiated foods should be labeled with the RADURA and the word irradiation. So, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, has launched a major marketing campaign to include irradiated meat in school lunches. With pressure from the food irradiation industry, which has had little success in grocery stores, I wonder why. This is from a few years ago. So they're trying to put the irradiated meat in school lunches. And they said, with pressure from the food irradiation industry, which has had little success in grocery stores, the government is encouraging schools to spend more money for processed food with a questionable technology. What's the real story? On May 2003, despite thousands of comments to the federal government from parents, teachers, and children nationwide opposing irradiated meat in the National School Lunch Program, 93% of those commenting were against it. Well, that's good to hear. You start to wonder what's everybody thinking, right? The government ignored the will of its constitution. Oh. So 90-some% of the people said they didn't want irradiated food, and they approved the use of irradiation for the federal nutritional program. Additionally, at 13 to 20 cents more per pound, the government is encouraging cash-strapped schools to spend more money for irradiated meat. Yeah, you got to kill those kids off early enough. It's really becoming a burden to let these kids live for too long, is how I'm seeing this. Beginning in January 2004, children who participate in the federal program could become guinea pigs in the government experiment that has neglected parental concerns and disregarded numerous studies that show the potential harmful effects of eating irradiated food. Research dating, and I do have a point here because the milk, they started with the milk, so research dating to the 1950s has revealed a wide range of problems in laboratory animals that ate irradiated food. Oh, do tell. Always a problem with those rats are having problems with, right? Including premature death, cancer, stillbirths, genetic damage. This stuff is sounding better and better. Organ malfunctions, stunted growth, and vitamin deficiencies. We're back at the vitamins again. Boy, irradiated food is really sounding pretty good. I don't know why those people said they didn't want it. Children are more susceptible to toxic substances in their environment because they eat, drink, and breathe 3 times as much as adults, pound per pound. Only one study on the effects of irradiated food consumption on children has ever been conducted. Now, gee, I wonder why that happened. Well, I believe they probably do a lot of these studies, but they probably do them on U.S. military bases that nobody will ever have access to. But I digress. A chromosome abnormality called polyploidy, that's Polyploidy, which has been associated with leukemia and direct exposure to radiation, was detected in malnourished children who ate recently irradiated wheat. Yeah, I've got pretty severe case of radiation myself, and the leukemia, well, it kills off all your red blood cells. So I only have a couple white blood cells working. It's tough to walk across the room at this point. So yeah, irradiating meat right before the kids eat it, not a good plan. But hey, it's a great plan for psychopaths. So anyway, so let me see. This is significant because of their daily food intake from the school meal programs are already undernourished because they come from low-income families who cannot afford to send their children to school with homemade lunches. Nowhere in the world has there been a mass feeding of irradiated food to children over a prolonged period of time. And by offering schools the option of purchasing irradiated meat for school lunches, which feeds 27 million children per year, the USDA could become the largest distributor of irradiated food in the world. Now, that's something to be proud of. The U.S. could hold the record for the distributor of the largest amount of irradiated food in the world. And we've been wondering, why does the U.S. need all this uranium? Well, they're dumping it in our homes, they're dumping it in our food, and so I'll keep reading here. Additionally, because, and this is the kicker, okay? Just like formaldehyde, they don't have to put that on the label of those things you bring into your house, now do they? Additionally, because federal law does not require labeling of irradiated food served in schools, restaurants, hospitals, and similar venues, irradiated meat served in school cafeterias need not be labeled. That's actually pretty stunning. But it also explains why they need all this uranium for besides our homes. They're zapping all of our food. You know, the U.S. can't even really export chicken to places like the UK because no one wants our food. And none of the smart countries do because they bleach the chicken. So instead of having cleaner chicken processing plants, they just throw some bleach on it. So I'll keep reading here. This makes it impossible for parents to know what school cafeterias are feeding their children and is a blatant violation of parents' right to know. No, it's not because we're all we're all deemed enemies of the state, so we don't have any rights. So just be thinking about that today, okay? Approving irradiated meat for school cafeterias nationwide means the USDA is willing to put our children's health at risk to help cover up the meat industry's sanitation failures. Irradiation is not an acceptable antidote for food safety problems. From strengthening government meat inspection to addressing the appalling disrepair in many school cafeterias, there is much more to be done. By using the purchasing power of the federal government to bail out a struggling industry and serve this questionable product to children has no place in a sensible food safety plan. But they're wrong here because that's the plan, not the bug in the system. How did this happen? Now let's get to the beef of the issue here, right? Get to the core root of the issue. The possibility of irradiated meat in school lunch programs began with a provision presented by Senator Tom Harkin, Harkin, a Democrat from Iowa, that was included in the 2002 Farm Bill passed by Congress. This provision directs the Secretary of Agriculture not to prohibit the use of irradiated food in the National Lunch Program. Not to prohibit. So previously, irradiated food had been prohibited. I don't know what this. Let me keep reading here. The provision attempted to accomplish legislatively what USDA could not achieve in 2001. In the spring of 2001, the Agriculture Marketing Service issued revised specifications for commodity contracts for the National School Lunch Program that would permit the purchase of irradiated food for the program. Yeah, the irradiated food is in, maybe it's in. That baby didn't go away. Against outcry against the inclusion. Natural News has learned that the FDA is intentionally plotting to deceive consumers over the labeling of irradiating foods. Here's what they're doing. It's now becoming a word trick, okay? They're taking the word irradiated and they're changing it to pasteurized. Because that's how I figured out the milk thing. Because they're pasteurizing milk supposedly to get rid of all these germs, right? Well, what does pasteurizing mean? Well, pasteurizing means irradiating. Stuff is always so tricky. Whenever I look into one of these things, I think, oh, this will be pretty simple. I'll just do a show about vitamin D. I've got a couple of files on it. I'll just take a quick look, and maybe I'll take a quick look at what's going on with other vitamins. And then, lo and behold, now I'm several hours, days down the road here. So, what they did was they just changed the word irradiated with pasteurized, okay? Uh, According to current FDA regulations, any food used as an ingredient in another food does not have to be labeled as irradiated. For example, if you buy coleslaw and the cabbage in the coleslaw has been irradiated, there is no requirement that the coleslaw carry any labeling indicating it has been irradiated. So then what they did was between the radiation in the milk, they started with the adding of the vitamin D. This is where the story takes off here, right? The vitamin D content of foods can also be increased through a process known as biofortification. This involves, and here again, it gets into crazy doses all over the places, right? Because this involves the addition of vitamin D to animal feed to increase the vitamin D content of produce, or exposure of animals' fungi or yeast to UVB light. So um, they say that how do I know the FDA wants to do this? The agency said so itself in a April the 4th, 2007 document filed in the Federal Registry. And it said, FDA is also proposing to allow a firm to petition FDA for use as an alternative term to irradiation other than pasteurized. In addition, FDA is proposing to permit, okay, I read that wrong. Okay, so FDA is proposing to permit a firm or a company selling this stuff to use the term pasteurized in lieu of irradiated. And it notifies the agency that the irradiation process being used meets the I'm sorry, this is just a little bit too insane for me this morning. Okay, so let me get this straight. You're able to change the word irradiation and use the word pasteurized in lieu of that, okay? Provided it notifies the agency, I guess that's the FDA, that the irradiated process being used meets the criteria specified for use in the term pasteurized in the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And the agency does not object to the notification. I'll keep reading. Did you know all that mind warping logic? Yeah, I really am having a hard time getting this stuff in my head. The FDA is essentially begging a company to position it to use the word pasteurized instead of irradiated, as long as they both result in the food being killed. Once it receives such a petition, it will approve it, claiming it is meeting the needs of industry. The FDA already allows lots of word substitutions in the areas of health and medicine. The phrase toxic poison has been replaced with chemotherapy, for example. None of this is funny. It's just striking me that way. So toxic poison has been replaced with chemotherapy. Over-medicated with dangerous psychiatric drugs has been replaced with the term treatment. And the phrase regulated with life-threatening synthetic chemicals has been replaced with the word managed, as in her diabetes has been managed. Yeah, I mean, I was over-medicated on those the psychiatric thing. They very much sold it as treatment. You're never going to walk another day if you don't take these pills, damn it. Listen to us. So, fluid milk products are systematically either mandatorily or voluntarily fortified with vitamin D in some countries, but their overall contribution to vitamin D intake and status worldwide is not fully understood. Geez, that's just surprising. I just feel like I might just pass out in shock. Researchers estimate that about 2/3 of the world's population is lactose intolerant and thus unable to properly digest the sugar found in dairy. And here we're back to sugar, right? Because dairy creates sugar. Sugar is how they're killing us with these cancers. But anyway, so it all wraps around what we're eating. So I imagine the irradiating the milk and the meat stuff really kind of help kick things off in a certain direction also. But let me see here. So researchers estimate 2/3 of the world's population is lactose intolerant and thus unable to properly digest the sugar found in dairy. People with this condition often experience diarrhea and other intestinal issues after consuming milk or dairy. However, this has been widely shown to be a myth, as not only do humans barely absorb the calcium from cow's milk, drinking it can actually deplete calcium levels. Animal proteins like milk acidify the body's pH, and this causes a biological correction. Calcium is released from the bones to act as an acid neutralizer and leaves the body in our urine, thus depleting calcium levels in our bones. Countries that have a low dairy consumption have fewer incidents of bone fractures, and the number of people with osteoporosis is often higher in regions where people consume high quantities of dairy products. However, direct evidence is lacking, but many believe that countries such as China have lower incidence of poor bone health because of where they get their calcium from. Dairy products are relatively rare in parts of Asia, so most of their calcium comes from plants. So then they have this insulin growth factor, and they claim that that's also a factor. Insulin growth factor 1 is injected into cows to increase milk production, but is not removed by pasteurization. This means that it is passed directly into milk, potentially causing a growth response in humans when consumed. Furthermore, some studies have shown that children who are given 3 or more servings of milk each day are more prone to becoming overweight. This directly contradicts dairy industry's advertising campaigns, which suggest that drinking cow's milk will help children to maintain or even lose weight. The World Health, or who are you going to call, advises to expose face and arms to sunshine for about 30 minutes a day while avoiding sunburn. Despite the widespread use of sunscreen for sun's protection, there are still concerns about its safety and potential link to cancer. Yeah. Scientific evidence and studies have shown that sunscreen does not cause cancer, but that this is not true because this is part of the publicity from the World Health Organization. And definitely go look for yourself. Sunscreen is causing cancer. It's also blocking you from getting vitamin D, so full circle, right? Let me see. And I looked again. It said currently only poultry and ground beef products are irradiated. The irradiated poultry is found in small independent grocery stores and so on, and some menus in some restaurants. Poultry received approval for radiation in 1990 by the FDA and in 1992 by the USDA. Well, we can rest assured that chickens got irradiated. Irradiated ground beef is found in many supermarkets as fresh or frozen bulk meat ground beef or as patties. This scientist said the only way to protect the population is to current is to make is to current and modified sterilization techniques that will make food safe for all. Current and modified practices, including radiation. See, here they also jump the words because here it says current and modified practices, including irradiation and pasteurization. They're two of the same word, okay? Are extremely effective in reducing harmful bacteria. Yeah, I'm glad this person is on their toes there, right? Um, and they said they said increase of 50% in food demand by 2030 will require more funding into food monitoring infrastructure so that all food with the potential to produce outbreaks can be oh, these people are just terrors, aren't they? And you can rest assured the United States currently has the highest rate of food irradiated in the world. Canadian neighbors approve only. Now, this is from a few years ago, so I would advise you to look a little bit further. And if you're growing your tomatoes and stuff in your own home and your onions, you won't have these problems. Just saying. So, Canadian neighbors approve only onions, potatoes, wheat, flour, whole wheat flour, and whole or ground spices, and dehydrated seasonings for radiation and sale in Canada. Unfortunately for Canadians, this means that they too cannot benefit from the high antioxidant values of spices since the majority will be irradiated. And that's another thing, it takes away your holistic ability to make your own spices. If you're planning on staying on the game board in a relatively sane way, I would really start thinking about growing some of these spices and stuff. Don't overwhelm yourself, but do it. Make progress. Stop sitting. Stop thinking tomorrow, tomorrow. Um, Let me see. If you align yourself with the misinformation that comes out of the sunscreen and cancer industries and combine that with the absurd advice from dermatologists, you get a wonderful cocktail of nonsense, sure to accelerate any cancer you may be trying to prevent. Then again, that's what the cancer industry wants. Not only does blocking the sun's rays from reaching your skin dramatically reduce optimal vitamin D levels, but when you use any conventional sunscreen, it's like spreading cancer right into your skin. Here's why sun damage is a term you should erase from your vocabulary and learn how to avoid 6 harmful ingredients. Any public health or mainstream medical warning about the sun always emphasizes damage. Be careful between the hours of 12 to 2 to reduce sun damage. To reduce sun damage, be sure to use a minimum of SP 30. You must protect yourself from the damaging effects of the sun. These messages are everywhere throughout our communication medium. I've got news for you. The sun does not damage your skin any more than walking damages your feet. It's part of nature. It's been around for years, for billions of years, and this planet would not survive without the sun, and neither would you. So don't think of it as damage, but part of the normal process of living on Earth and accepting all the health benefits the sun has to offer you. It nourishes the body and gives you life to nature. Few people realize that spending an average of 3 hours a day exposed to sunlight can slash the risk of cancer by up to 50%. Being scared of the sun is like being afraid of water. Small doses will never harm you, but take in large amounts of either and you could have a problem. Just as you must respect the water, you must also respect the sun. It's not about fearing the sun's rays, but knowing your limits. Yes, the sun will age your skin and affect your DNA, but that is essentially a normal process. The idea that sunscreen prevents cancer is a myth promoted by pharmaceutical companies, conventional medicine, and the mainstream media for one purpose: profit, and I would argue eugenics. The sunscreen industry makes money by selling lotion products that actually contain cancer-causing chemicals. It then donates a portion of that money to the cancer industry through nonprofit groups like cancer societies, which in turn run heartbreaking public service ads urging people to use sunscreen to prevent cancer. Unless you have a thick layer of zinc paste on your body, no matter what sun protection you use, you are being bombarded by ultraviolet rays with extended time in the sun. When you use sunscreens, regardless of SPF protection level, you can sustain significant damage to your skin through added inflammation from the ingredients themselves. Please do not confuse a lack of redness with a lack of damage. Any so-called damage to the skin is only magnified with sunscreen. Collagen, elastin, and other forms of skin damage occur with extended time in the sun while using specific sunscreen chemicals. A sunburn, redness, and pain are a direct result of the swelling, increased circulation, and an inflammatory cascade that were stimulated by the DNA lesion. This is not something that causes cancer in a healthy body. If it were, the majority of our ancestors who had up to 5 times greater daily exposure to the outdoors than we do today would all have died from skin cancer. The sun does not cause cancer. Researchers have concluded that UVA exposure has not contributed to the rise in the incidence of melanoma over the past 30 years. UVA makes up 90% of the ultraviolet light spectrum of sunlight. Our data refute the only direct evidence that UVA causes melanoma, which is not to say that UVA is harmless, said the study director. No scientific literature has ever proven that sunlight causes cancer in human beings. Most studies that have attempted to find a cause have only found correlations, and many scientists have established the toxicity level of the human body, which reacts with the UV spectrum, is what causes cancer, not the sunlight itself. Both UVA and UVB can cause tanning and burning, although UVB does so far more rapidly. UVA, however, penetrates your skin more deeply than UVB. UVB appears to be protective against melanoma, or rather, the vitamin D your body produces in response to UVB radiation is protective. And they wrote this thing in the Lancet. Paradoxically, outdoor workers have a decreased risk of melanoma compared with indoor workers, suggesting that chronic sunlight exposure can have a positive effect. So if UVA and UVB do not cause melanoma, why use sunscreen? Skin cancer rates are increasing, and the so-called experts are still blaming the sun for a problem manufactured right here on Earth. If the sun was really causing skin cancer and if sunscreen prevented it, we'd be cancer-free by now. We've already been spending less time outside than ever and wasting billions of dollars a year on needless, dangerous creams and lotions. It's amazing how many people ask me, what am I supposed to do when I go out in the sun for prolonged periods without sunscreen. What do you think our ancestors did? They exposed themselves in moderation. They would use clothing, spend time in the shade or indoors if they've exceeded their exposure limit. Do the same and don't spend more time than necessary. That will lead to burning. But justifying more time outside in the sun, exceeding your exposure limit, and only because you are wearing sunscreen is truly an unhealthy approach to sun exposure. Optimum vitamin D levels are obtained by simply exposing your bare skin to the sun. Blocking the sun's rays from reaching our skin dramatically influences our optimum vitamin D levels, leading to higher mortality, critical illness, and mental health disorders. There is unfortunately a large emphasis in current vitamin D research that overstates the benefits of vitamin D supplementation on the conclusions of studies conducted on UV exposure from the sun. Such disparities in reporting have obviously increased the supplement market for this valuable nutrient. However, vitamin D from sunlight exposure and supplementation may not be interchangeable in terms of effectiveness. Exposure to ultraviolet B radiation in sunlight provides the mechanism for more than 90% of the vitamin D production in most individuals. The widespread use of sunscreens, particularly those with high sun protection factors or SPF, may also lead to significant decrease in solar-induced pre-vitamin D3 in the skin, resulting in a vitamin D level which is insufficient for protection against a wide range of diseases. Well, there certainly is a reason why they're having us holed up inside and wearing sunscreen and stuff, right? They do not want us to be healthy. This is about eugenics. So they say exposure to sunlight and ultraviolet light has not repeatedly shown to not be the cause of cancer. They've done this saying, University of Texas over the past 30 years. And then they have the ingredients to avoid. Well, I would just personally, you can look up these ingredients if you want. I would personally not use these products, but I'm not trying to give you medical advice. If you want to use sunscreen, by all means, use away. But there's one that's the worst. The toxicity of zinc oxide, a material widely used in sunscreens, particles smaller than blah, blah, blah. Yeah, zinc oxide is in those sunscreens. Another toxic ingredient, titanium dioxide, not a good thing. It has a strong dose-dependent effect on cell proliferation and cell death. Why do dermatologists promote sunscreen? Quite simply because they like repeat business. Exposure to ultraviolet B radiation in sunlight provides the mechanism for more than 90% of the vitamin D production in most individuals, and they know it. Our interaction with the sun is the one thing that may prevent cancer more than anything else. A study in the American Journal of Epidemiology showed that women who had at least 21 hours a week of exposure to the sun's UV rays in their teens were 29% less likely to get cancer than those getting under an hour a day. For women who spent the most time outside in their 40s and 50s, the risk fell by 26%. And for those above 60, sunshine halved their chances of a tumor. Comprehensive scientific reviews indicate that 83% of 785 sunscreen products contain ingredients with significant safety concerns. Only 17% of the products on the market block both UVA and UVA radiation, which is the intended purpose of sunscreens. Moreover, almost half of the almost 500 of the most popular sunscreen products may actually increase the speed at which malignant cells develop and spread skin cancer because they contain vitamin A or its derivatives retinol and retinol, which accelerate tumor growth. Now, what's fascinating is the claim by public health watchdogs that almost 90% of melanomas are attributed to exposure to ultraviolet UV radiation from the sun. They claim that regular daily use of an SP 15 or higher sunscreen reduces the risk of developing melanoma by 50%. It's also interesting how when traveling from either pole to the equator, UV exposure increases up to 5,000%. And I'm not following this part. So to conclude that UVA exposure has not contributed to the rise. Yeah. Uh, so our data refute the only direct evidence that UVA causes melanoma, right? Which is not to say that UVA is harmless. So anyway, so in wrapping up about this vitamin D, and I'll have a lot more about the sugar when I get back to the Sugar in the Wind show, but vitamin D is a steroid hormone that plays a vital role in calcium and phosphate absorption. In recent studies, several associations between low levels of vitamin D or hypovitamosis D and neuropsychiatric disorders have begun to surface. These disorders include, but are not limited to, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, epilepsy, schizophrenia, and autism. The hormone in vitamin D is required to absorb calcium from the gut into the bloodstream. Vitamin D is also produced in the skin in response to sunlight, and it's also absorbed from food eaten. About 10% can be gotten through your food. So why did they start attacking vitamin D? Well, because they wanted to fortify vitamin D, and they also wanted to give it better shelf life. So vitamin D was originally added to milk by irradiated or feeding cows irradiated yeast. So they either irradiated the milk directly or the cows were fed irradiated yeast was how it all got started. A simpler and more effective method, adding vitamin D concentrate to milk, was developed and put into use in the 1940s. This practice is still in use today. Pasteurized milk is dairy milk that is heated and cooled using a simple heating process that makes milk safe to drink before it is packaged and shipped to grocery stores. The difference between raw milk and regular milk, it doesn't, but what they leave off of these explanations is this pasteurization and the irradiation part, because food irradiation is today's pasteurization. In the early 1900s, pasteurization wiped out rampant milk-borne disease such as typhoid fever, scarlet fever, and diphtheria. But some people were concerned about, yeah, I can guess what people, were concerned about its effects on milk quality and sanitary conditions in dairy processing. Today, food irradiation has the capacity to significantly drop all this stuff. So, yeah, I've already gone into this stuff. I think I put it here too. Yeah, irradiating raw meat can also eliminate toxoplasma organisms responsible for severe eye and infection. Irradiating prepared ready-to-eat meats such as hot dog. Listen, the closer you can get to a plant-based diet, the better off you're going to be. It'll save you a ton of money. And here's what they're doing. They're doing their gamma rays is actually what they're doing. And I'll just tell you this one little part because I don't want to weigh this all down. Gamma ray technology, gamma, the dangerous stuff, uses the radiation given off by the radioactive form of cobalt 60 or selenium 137 to produce high energy photons called gamma rays, which can penetrate foods to a depth of several feet. Since these substances do not give off neutrons, they do not make anything around them radioactive. Well, this kind of technology has been at work for more than 30 years for sterilizing medical, dental, and household products and treating cancer. Yeah, see, here again, it starts to sound good again, right? Well, they're treating cancer with these gamma rays, right? The gamma rays are what they're putting into our houses right now. They're making us sick. So, and they go on to say, during food irradiation, the substance is pulled into a chamber with massive concrete walls that keep any rays from escaping, so the food is exposed to the rays for a defined period of time. The electron beam is a stream of high-energy electrons propelled from an electron gun, a larger version of the device in the back of a TV tube that propels electrons into the screen. This electron beam generator is simply switched on and off and does not involve radioactivity. But then they say shielding is necessary to protect workers from the electron beam, but not in the form of the massive concrete walls required. Oh, this is just craziness, right? So yeah, it's being all irradiated. And they say overcoming consumer confusion. I don't think I'm confused. Are you? I think the biggest barrier for food irradiation is lack of consumer understanding of what irradiation is. No, I think we're getting the picture here. I think we're getting the picture here. So food irradiation, also known as cold pasteurization, is not a new technology. The idea of using irradiation to destroy microorganisms in food may have emerged as early as 1895, soon after radioactivity was discovered. Well, gee, and what happened around 1985? Oh, let me guess. The Gilded Age? In 1963, the FDA approved irradiation to control insects in wheat and wheat flour and has studied excuse me, and has studied food irradiant effects for more than 40 years. Yeah, I have really studied it, right? So, about 40 countries use the technology, and many organizations, including the CDC, the World Health Organization, the USDA, the FDA, the American Diabetic Association, and the American Medical Association, all endorse irradiation. Yet consumer acceptance of food irradiation has been elusive. Opponents and environmental and consumer advocacy groups have stepped forward with claims that food irradiated poses safety concerns, affects food quality, causes nutrient loss, and threatens the environment. The effects of negative activist groups is quite strong. People hear things from activist groups and it decreases the consumer acceptance a lot. They point out that some foods have found no, excuse me, some studies have found that consumers are willing to pay for radiated food products once the benefits have been fully explained to them. Well, food irradiation is getting more attention in light of the August 2008 FDA final rule allowing, here we go, irradiation of fresh iceberg lettuce and spinach in both loose and bagged form. So that's where that guy was talking about that McDonald's stuff having formaldehyde. So what's the difference really? Formaldehyde, irradiation, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. The FDA reported that irradiating fresh iceberg lettuce and spinach will help protect consumers from disease-causing bacteria such as salmonella. In addition, irradiating fresh iceberg lettuce and fresh spinach will lengthen their time to spoiling. Yeah, that's what it's all about, right? The FDA ruling adds iceberg lettuce and spinach to prolong freshness, wheat, flour, potatoes are being irradiated, red meat, poultry, and spices. They say currently the volume of food being irradiated in the United States is low, maybe only a couple percentage. I don't believe any of this stuff, but I would suggest that, well, I'm not sure that I'm pretty sure that we didn't come from an environment where we cannibalized other people, like cows and stuff. So I could go on and on about this stuff, but I don't believe that. I believe that getting us to eat meat and stuff was sharing in their cannibalism rituals. That's just how I feel about it. And I'll be getting more about how to solve all this stuff in the next show, but not today. But let me finish up with this stuff. What year did they start adding vitamin D to milk? In the 1930s, the U.S. began to fortify milk with vitamin D in an effort to eradicate rickets, okay? Which fruit is rich in vitamin D? Oranges are one of the fruits rich in vitamin D as its juice is fortified. See, that's the stuff you buy on the shelf, right? Um, Vitamin D fortification of milk and milk products began in the 1930s. The practice was recommended by guess who? The American Medical Association Council on Foods and Nutrition to assist in reducing rickets in children. 1955. Our knowledge, a portion of milk products are systematically either mandatory or voluntarily fortified with vitamin D. Let me see. What are the symptoms when vitamin D is low? Fatigue, not sleeping well. To get back to the sleeping well, you have to sleep to repair your body. So all of this, including encouraging coffee drinking. I just stopped drinking coffee. I was drinking 1 cup a day, and I thought, well, after I listened to that Barbara O'Neill, I thought, I really need to switch to lemon water in the morning. Coffee is definitely out because for a lot of people, even 1 cup of coffee will affect your long-term sleep. And the only way you're going to start healing yourself is sleep. So I mean, that's not the only way, good health and sleep, but and it doesn't take a radical, this is not like you got to upheave your whole life, okay? So you also experience bone pain or achiness when you're vitamin D deficient, depression or feeling of sadness, hair loss, loss of appetite, getting sick more easily. So that's all I have to say about this stuff because what they did was there was this thing called the wharf. They cooked up this thing called the wharf, and it was patent licensing. And what it was to change around our diet to say that, oh, we need all these vitamins, and oh, you were going to fortify all this food, it's going to be good for you. Because remember, they're the ones making all the formulas, right? So do you really think when your label says there's so much about vitamin D in your food, do you really believe on any level that that's true? Um, and I'm pretty sure that they called it a vitamin so they could avoid having to call it a hormone. So I have a lot of information down there for you to take a look at. I'm certainly not trying to give you any form of medical advice. Believe me, when you get into executing some of these things, like clean up your diet and stuff, it is absolutely much simpler than taking vitamins and paying for meat and all that kind of stuff. So I'll come back with a solution. So because they say you get the picture, right? Um, they claim that vitamin D was added to milk 90 years ago to prevent rickets. Later, they said it would give us strong bones. They started fortifying milk by radiating it. Then they radiated yeast and then added that. Now they can't pretend vitamin D is also the exact active ingredient in rat poisoning. So they're saying that this ingredient in rat poisoning, which they're calling vitamin D, gives you strong bones. So they did a meta study that shows that it doesn't strengthen bones to take vitamin D because vitamin D is rat poisoning, right? So, uh, and just like prednisone, vitamin D, which is actually a steroid, may make you feel better in the very short term, but is actually harmful to your immune system in the mid to long term. Considering the fact that we now accept that our biological activity from vitamin B, or what the typically called is a steroid hormone. It is somewhat ironic that vitamin D became classified as a vitamin. It was in 1919 or 1920 that Sir Edward Mellanby, working with dogs, got it? Woof, 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 dogs raised exclusively indoors in the absence of sunlight or ultraviolet light, devised a diet that allowed him to unequivocally establish that the bone disease rickets was caused by deficiency of a trace component present in the diet. In 1912, he wrote this: the action of fats in rickets is due to a vitamin or accessory food factor which they contain, probably identical with the fat-soluble vitamin. Furthermore, he established that cod liver oil was an excellent anti-critical agent. So, uh, in 1923, they clearly identified that when a precursor of vitamin D in the skin, so they've known this stuff for a long time. They had to really change things around because they needed to get rid of the doctors and the health people and all that. And when you start pasteurizing or radiating, you wipe out most of your components. I'm not going to go into the rest of all this stuff because it just there you'll find some very interesting articles below that explain that this wharf business. So it's been just a pretty horrendous trick, and I would hope that you would take a look at the things that are down below and learn to absorb it for yourself. And keep in mind, when you go off the track and changing your diet will be putting you off the track with a lot of other people in your life. This is your life, right? Keep that straight. Bullying people into submission doesn't work. And many have adopted rather psychopathic skills in bullying other people out of concern, right? You can't bully me around and then express concern at the same time. It's kind of like the old marketing trick. You cannot antagonize and persuade at the same time. So if you want somebody to listen to you, don't try bullying them around and telling them about what they should be doing. Set some boundaries about what you want to do and get moving. If you want other people to join you, they may notice what you're doing and want to ask some questions about it. But do it for the right purposes. Leave the dynamics out of it. And remember, if there is a way that you can reach out and help, the most vulnerable children are now being drawn away from even having food in schools, even the bad food. So keep in mind, in the next show, I'll lay out some incredibly simple things to do. It won't cost you anything. It'll save you money. And really quickly, you will feel a lot better. And I'll also be talking about some more about these people that are out there talking about what you should be doing. All these so-called social media influencers and stuff talking about what vitamins you should be taking and what you should be doing, all this stuff. The majority of them, I would say, do not have your best interests at heart. Hey, I didn't go to their colleges and stuff, okay? And I figured this stuff out. So you got to tell me that these big multi-million sub people, these big social media people selling all this stuff to people, they all have their own vitamin lines and stuff. You're telling me that they're not leaving a lot of things out of the picture? Well, of course they are. Just look at this. They're leaving out the toxicity of the base ingredients. No one's talking about what are the ingredients that go in there and why is it written up as proprietary. So until they can answer those questions for me, they can keep their vitamins to themselves. So, and when you go to make changes, keep in mind, not everybody's going to agree with you, but if you have the right mindset, it's not like you're doing it for anybody else. Just try it. Give it a shot. The interesting part about all of this is this to me. They are studying out with the intent and things they are doing to promote and do eugenics against the rest of us, right? Well, if we don't take heed and we replicate that, like let's say, for example, everybody has this idea, oh, you deserve a sweet treat today. So let's say that now that we fully understand, well, you'll understand more in the next show, but now that we fully understand that sugar needs to go, okay, has to go. And when you understand that, it would feel insane to go and bake some cookies to give to some kids after school, now wouldn't it? So we are taking what they're giving us and we're also replicating it. So none of them have stood with guns over our homes. Well, not yet, too. Excuse me. No one is being force fed this food except the poor are being force fed it because of the thing. But what's going to happen next is once food escalates, once they can't pick those crops and stuff, all of the fresh food, the food that will help nourish your body, is going to become harder and harder to get. It'll be available, but it'll be very expensive. That's why you really need to take a look at those things that I put down below as far as some gardening tips for inside of your home. If you're going to be treating your kids without antibiotics and stuff and you want to have some onions, you better be growing your own. So when you go to make a major change like this, and trust me, I'm an expert at this kind of stuff. 30 years ago, when I started talking about we're surrounded by psychopaths, all I heard was, you are crazy. That's not true. Well, come to find out, it is true. Come to find out, you may or may not agree with I'm not crazy, but you can have whatever opinion you choose. But when you go to make change, remember, do it so you stand in solitary with what you want to accomplish. This is your track on this game board. Don't sit around and wait for everybody to join you. Many times when you start off and you start something, others will join you. And they've even done some studies about that. Like if somebody's lying there that needs help, a lot of people will walk by until that one person stops and says, "Can I help you?" Be that voice. Be that person that can say, "Can I help you?" And in the meantime, be your own person. Goodbye for